As an immigrant, can you participate in a protest for Palestine? The short answer is yes, but you must keep these things in mind when engaging in a protest. That way you can participate safely and avoid any potential issues related to your immigration status. So first and foremost, the right to free speech extends to all individuals in the United States, regardless of immigration status. This means you have the right to participate in political protests and demonstrations and marches. Hundreds of thousands of individuals, if not more, have taken the streets around the world in order to express support for the people of Palestine, who have faced a violent and relentless bombardment by the Israeli government, as well as an unlawful blockade of food, water, electricity, and fuel. Now, when you have mass demonstrations of importance like this one, where individuals are protesting against the Israeli government's war crimes and crimes against humanity, there can be instances where the Department of Homeland Security could have officials as well as ICE agents at these kinds of demonstrations. This has happened in the past, where we saw DHS and ICE at protests in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. There can also be the presence of local law enforcement, which can create risks for immigrants. So if you're at a protest and you are approached by law enforcement, you do have the right to remain silent and refuse to answer anything. If the law enforcement officer starts questioning you, you can say, "I know my right to remain silent and I'm choosing to exercise it." Now, some states do require you to identify yourself. So before you go to a protest, make sure you know what your state's rules are. If you are required to identify yourself, you may present a state-issued form of identification or another form of ID produced in the United States. It is super critical that you do not provide any false information or documentation to law enforcement. Also not required to identify your immigration status, your country of birth, your date of entry into the U.S., or any other immigration-related information. You also have the right to refuse the consent of yourself or your belongings. If law enforcement asks to search you, you can say, "I do not consent to a search of myself or my belongings." Now, sometimes law enforcement officers can indirectly try to get your consent by asking you to empty your pockets, for example, or ask you a question like, "What's inside your bag?" Again, it's important to make sure that you say you do not consent to the search. If you're arrested or detained for any reason, you can't invoke your right to speak to a lawyer. Once you invoke that right, make sure you remain silent. Any interaction with local law enforcement can lead to an encounter with immigration officials. For example, at protests, you can sometimes be charged with unlawful assembly, disturbing the peace, or failure to disperse. So when you go to a protest, you need to make sure that you're as peaceful as possible and following all local rules and laws. Because again, these kinds of arrests could lead to an encounter with ICE or simply have an impact on you in the future when you try to go forward with an immigration benefit. Now, it's important for me to mention that unfortunately there's this false narrative that's been out there that when you're participating in a protest for Palestine, you're actually protesting in support of Hamas. And because Hamas has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, your participation in this protest essentially means you're supporting terrorism, which could result in the revocation of your visa or deportation or the denial of immigration benefits in the future. Now, the reason why this is absolutely false is because Palestinians are a nationality. They're a group of people. They're not designated as terrorists. Expressing support for Palestinians does not mean you're expressing support for Hamas. So if you're an undocumented immigrant or an immigrant here in the United States with a visa, please do not allow this false narrative to prevent you from protesting in support of Palestine. It's your First Amendment right. So lastly, when going to a protest, make sure you have a safety plan in mind, know the protest route and emergency exits, know who is organizing the event, and have the contact information of the organizers. Leave your mobile device at home or turn off the facial and fingerprint recognition. This can prevent law enforcement from getting into your phone without your consent. And also carry a Know Your Rights card. You can get a lot of these online and print it and take it with you to a protest and present it to law enforcement if you ever encounter them. You can also do your own research online before you go to a protest in order to make sure that you've covered all of your bases so that you can participate meaningfully, safely, and without a problem. For more immigration news and information, feel free to give us a follow.